Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Wisteria here. Please hit the like, it's completely free. And share if you can. It does help. So we're still on the Brothers Grimm, though we don't have very many left to go, I'm afraid. This one is Tom Thumb. Poor peasant sat one evening by his hearth and poked the fire, while his wife sat opposite spinning. He said, "What a sad thing is it that we have no children. Our home is too quiet, while other folks' houses are noisy and cheerful." "Yes," answered his wife, and she sighed, "even if it were only one, and if it were no bigger than my thumb, I should be quite content. We would love it with all our hearts." Now some time after this she had a little boy, who was strong and healthy, but was no bigger than a thumb. Then they said, "Well, our wish is fulfilled, and, small as he is, we will love him dearly." And because of his tiny stature, they decided to call him Tom Thumb. They let him want for nothing, yet still the child grew no bigger, but remained the same size as when he was born. Still, he looked out on the world with intelligent eyes, and soon showed himself a clever and agile creature who was lucky in all that he attempted. One day, when the peasant was preparing to go into the forest to cut wood, he said to himself, "I wish I had someone to bring the cart after me." "Oh, father," said Tom Thumb, "I will soon bring it. You leave it to me. It shall be there at the appointed time." Then the peasant laughed and said, "How can that be? You are much too small to even hold the reins." "That doesn't matter, if only mother will harness the horse," answered Tom. "I will sit in his ear and tell him where to go." "Very well," said the father, "we will try it for once." When the time came, the mother harnessed the horse and sat Tom in its ear, and the little creature, he called out into his ear, "Gee-up," and that's calling Tom, the little creature, and whoa in turn, and directed it where to go. It went quite well, just as though it were being driven by its master, and they went the right way to the wood. Now it happened that while the cart was turning a corner, and Tom was calling to the horse, two strange men appeared on the scene. "My goodness," said one, "what is this? There goes the cart, and a driver is calling to the horse, but there's nothing to be seen." "There is something queer about this," said the other. "We will follow the cart and see where it stops." The cart went on deep into the forest and arrived quite safely at the place where the wood was cut. When Tom spied his father, he said, "You see, father, here I am with the cart. Now lift me down." His father held the horse with his left hand and took his little son out of his ear with the right. Then Tom sat down happily on a straw. When the two strangers noticed him, they did not know what to say for astonishment. Then one drew the other aside and said, "Listen, that little creature might make our fortune if we were to show him in the town for money. We will buy him." So they went up to the peasant and said, "Sell us the little man. He shall be well looked after with us." "No," said the peasant, "he is the light of my eyes, and I will not sell him for all the gold in the world." But Tom Thumb, when he heard the bargain, crept up by the folds of the father's coat, and placed himself on his shoulder and whispered in his ear, "Father, let me go. I will soon come back again." Then his father gave him to the two men for a fine piece of gold. "Where will you sit?" they asked him. "Oh, put me on the brim of your hat. Then I can walk up and down and observe the neighbourhood without me having to fall off, of course. Any other place may be unstable." They did as he wished, and when Tom had said good-bye to his father, they went away with him. They walked on till it was twilight, and the little man said, You must lift me down. Stay where you are, answered the man, on whose head he sat. No, said Tom, I will come down. Lift me down immediately. The man took off his hat and set the little creature in the field by the wayside. He jumped and crept about for a time, here and there among the sods, then slipped suddenly into a mouse-hole, where he had discovered. Good evening, gentlemen. Just you go home without me, he called out to them in mockery. They ran about and poked with sticks into the mouse-hole, but all in vain. Tom crept further and further back, and as soon as it got quite dark, they were forced to go home, full of anger and with empty purses. When Tom noticed that they were gone, he crept out of his underground hiding-place. It is dangerous walking in this field in the dark, he said. One might easily break one's leg or one's neck. Luckily, he came to an empty snail shell. Thank goodness, he said. I can pass the night safely in here. And he sat down. Not long after, just when he was about to go to sleep, he heard two men pass by. One said, How shall we set about stealing the rich person's gold and silver? I can tell you, interrupted Tom. What was that? Said one robber. And then he was frightened and said, I heard someone speak. They remained standing and listened. Then Tom spoke again. Take me with you, and I will help you. Where are you? They asked. Just look on the ground and see where the voice comes from, he answered to them, obviously to get their attention, for he was very small and on the ground. There's no way they would see him if he had not given them any clues as to where he was. So obviously, they looked, and they looked. They did not know what to think. Their expressions on their faces, Tom was giggling. Of course not too loud. He did not want them to hear. The thieves, though, looked and looked and looked. At last, they found him, and they lifted him up. You little urchin, are you going to help us? Yes, he said. I will creep between the iron bars in the pastor's room, and will hand out to you what you want. All right, they said. We will see what you can do. When they came to the parsonage, Tom crept into the room and called out immediately with all his strength to the others, Do you want anything that is here? The thieves were frightened and said, Do speak softly, and don't wake anyone. But Tom pretended not to understand and called out again, What? What do you want? Everything? The cook, who slept above, heard him and sat up in bed and listened, but the thieves were so frightened that they retreated a little way. At last they summoned up courage again and thought to themselves, The little rogue wants to tease us. So they came back and whispered to him, Now do be serious and hand us out something. Then Tom called out again, as loud as he could, I will give you everything if only you will hold out your hands. The maid, who was listening intently, heard him quite distinctively. She jumped out of bed, stumbled to the door. The thieves turned and fled, running as though wild huntsmen were after them. But the maid, seeing nothing, went to get a light. When she came back with it, Tom, without being seen, slipped out into the barn, and the maid, after she had searched every corner, found nothing, went to bed again, thinking she'd been dreaming with her eyes and ears open. Tom Thumb climbed about in the hay and found a splendid place to sleep. There he determined to rest till day came, and then to go home to his parents. But he had other experiences to go through first. This world is full of trouble and sorrow. The maid got up in the grey dawn to feed the cows. First she went into the barn, where she piled up an armful of hay, the very bundle in which poor Tom was asleep. But he slept so soundly that he knew nothing, till he was almost in the mouth of a cow, and it was eating him up in the hay. Heavens, he said, however did I get into this mill? But he soon saw where he was, and The great thing was to avoid being crushed between the cow's teeth. At last, whether he liked it or not, he had to go down the cow's throat. The windows have been forgotten in this house, he said. The sun does not shine into it, as no light has been provided. Altogether, he was very ill pleased with his quarters, and, worst of all, more and more hay came in at the door, and the space grew narrower and narrower. At last he called out, in his fear, as loud as he could, "Don't give me any more food! Don't give me any more food!" The maid was just milking the cow, and when she heard the same voice as in the night, without seeing anyone, she was frightened, and slipped from her stool and spilt the milk. Then, in the greatest haste, she ran to her master and said, "Oh, your reverence, the cow has spoken." "Are you mad?" he answered. But he went into the stable himself to see what was happening. Scarcely had he set foot in that cowshed before Tom began again, "Don't bring me any more food." Then the pastor was terrified too, and thought that the cow must be bewitched. He ordered it to be killed. It was accordingly slaughtered, but the stomach in which Tom was hidden was thrown into the manure heap. Tom had the greatest trouble in working his way out, and just as he stuck out his head, a hungry wolf ran by and snapped up the whole stomach with one bite. But still, Tom did not lose courage. "Perhaps a wolf will listen to reason," he said. So he called out, "Dear wolf, I know where you would find a magnificent meal." "Where is it to be had?" asked the wolf. "Why, in such and such a house," answered Tom. "You must squeeze through the grating of the storeroom window, and there you will find cakes, bacon and sausages, as many as you could possibly eat." And he went on to describe his father's house. The wolf did not wait to hear this twice, and at night forced himself in through the grating, and ate to its heart's content. When he was satisfied, he wanted to go away again, but he had grown so fat that he could not get out the same way. Tom had reckoned on this, and began to make a great commotion inside the wolf's body, struggling and screaming with all his might. "Be quiet," said the wolf. "You will wake up the people of this house." "All very fine," answered Tom. "You have eaten your fill, and now I am going to make merry." And he began to scream again with all his might. At last his father and mother woke up and ran to the room and looked through the crack of the door, and when they saw a wolf, they went away. The husband fetched his axe, and the wife the scythe. "You stay behind," said the man, as they came into the room. "If my blow does not kill him, you must attack and rip up his body." When Tom Thumb heard his father's voice, he called out, "Dear father, I am here, inside the wolf's body." Full of joy, his father cried, "Heaven be praised, dear child is found again." And he bade his wife throw aside the scythe, that it might not injure Tom. Then he gathered himself together and struck the wolf a blow on the head, so that it fell down lifeless. Then with knives and shears they ripped up the body and took their little boy out. "Ah," said his father, "what trouble we have been in about you." "Yes, father, I've travelled about the world, and I'm thankful to breathe fresh air again." "Wherever have you been?" they asked. "Down a mouse hole, in a cow's stomach, and in a wolf's maw," he answered. "And now I shall stay with you, and we will never sell you again for all the riches in the world," they said, kissing and cuddling their child. Then they gave him food and drink, and new clothes made for him. On his own, he had been spoilt and had good travels, but he was happy to be home. The end. That's the story by Brothers Grimm, Tom Thumb. Not what I expected. Interesting indeed. Quite a lot of guts involved. Yeah. Thank you for listening and many blessings.